So technology is obviously a driver for change and a catalyst for disruption in educator practice. But we shouldn't always just blindly follow the technological trends. Being aware of them is important, but also being critical of how the technology can impact your teaching practice is also important. So I just wanted to spend a few moments going over some trends in education. And remember, a trend is a general movement. It doesn't mean to say that it will have a lasting impact. So we're going to look at some trends and briefly discuss how they might impact educator practice in the near future. So I'm sure when you start thinking about technological trends in education, one of the first things that come to mind is immersive learning technology. Virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, extended reality, all of this terminology is related to this idea that we can create more immersive, engaging, learning environments with this technology. Virtual reality, for those that maybe you're not familiar with the separation, virtual reality is generally when you put on the headset and you only see what's projected through that headset. So, a 3D world, a 3D environment. Augmented reality is when you see the space around you, but you also see a generated image in the room. So an example of augmented reality is, I think 4 or 5 years ago, I was looking and working with a prototype of the Microsoft HoloLens. And similarly, you put the headset on, you see the whole room, but then there was a cadaver, in this case, that was projected in the room, and people could see the cadaver from the different angles that they were stood, but we were all sharing our view of the image that wasn't actually physically there. This technology is exciting and it's interesting and it's entertaining. Will it make decisive impact in education in the near future? I'm unsure. Like I said, the augmented reality headsets I was looking at 5 or 6 years ago haven't come to fully to market, and they're not widely accessible. The software and the products were still very expensive to develop. Similarly to virtual reality, in the gaming world, there's progress being made, but is it really adding a lot of extra value in education? We'll look at a model in the future that talks about technology's impact. Is it just replacing something, or is it transforming the learning experience? And my personal opinion, I think, at the moment with augmented reality, virtual reality, is yes, it's very exciting, but I feel it's just replicating experiences that we can still have. I think for virtual reality, there's still a big gap in full immersion, and that will come when haptics are developed further. So haptics are when you will be able to feel things in the virtual environment, and I think that's going to take us to the next level. At the moment, there's still a lot of replication of worlds. It doesn't mean to say I can't see a value. So for example, in history or geography, I can see a value in creating a virtual reality environment to give people access. But when it comes to it's been mentioned a lot about medical education's use of these environments, and I still think it's a long way away. So again, going back to the anatomy training, the experience on a real cadaver is still not able to be replicated fully in the virtual reality environment. So virtual reality, immersive learning technologies, super interesting, and I am really interested in this field. And if you're interested in reading more from the realms of science fiction, a good book is Ready Player One, that looks at virtual reality in the future and how people and society are kind of interacting and living in those virtual worlds. I think it's recently been made into a Spielberg movie also. And back from the 1990s, Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash is a good read, and this author actually coins the term metaverse, which I think Facebook have recently stolen. So there's just some good reads if you're interested in the field generally. Okay, the next trend is around learning analytics, and again this concept is really good and interesting in the sense that we can derive data from our learners, and then based on that data we can decide to make interventions, add extra support, maybe fast track learners, really kind of get this extra level of information and knowledge based on what the learners are doing. And obviously learning analytics are generally generated from interactions in the digital learning environments. Learning management systems, for example, produce learning analytics. Now, the caution in relation to learning analytics is that producing data is one thing. How that data is analysed and interpreted and actioned is a whole different thing. What I find with learning analytics at this stage, especially from the learning management systems, is it's a little bit superficial. So it tells me things like who's logged in, for how long, where have they clicked, have they watched videos. It's not really giving me any real deep insight. So view counts are one form of learning analytics. So does it mean, for example, somebody who's watched the video all the way to the end has learnt more than somebody who's just skipped through it? It's unsure. So again, learning analytics, they're emerging, potentially useful, but we have to be careful of how we measure and interpret that data. Artificial intelligence is kind of related to the data produced from learning analytics, so it could be, and the next concept that I'll talk about, which is adaptive learning. But basically, this artificial intelligence is this huge umbrella term that I think mainly we're talking about machine learning, and that algorithms can help us make decisions and move in certain ways. We often think of artificial intelligence as this huge leap that will happen overnight, and suddenly we'll have sentient robots walking the streets. But really, it's this slow incremental development, and anyone who's kind of interacted with a chatbot on a website has probably interacted with some form of artificial intelligence or machine learning. Anyone who watches Netflix, there's an algorithm behind that, a machine learning algorithm that's trying to push content to you that it thinks will be most likely to be engaged with. And even to the point where they're changing the thumbnails, the visuals on those shows to see which ones are the most popular. And this is why I encourage my daughter and wife not to go onto my Netflix profile, because I say, you're messing with my algorithm. It's going to start suggesting Peppa Pig and other things that I don't want to see. So there's a kind of a complex algorithm in place there, but then it still doesn't really pick up the nuances of multiple human behavior. Now, a really good example of artificial intelligence and adaptive learning in education, I think, is the Duolingo language app. So this really gives you a personalized learning experience, and the algorithm in this software, it really kind of identifies what you were knowing and doing well with, and also what you're struggling with, and it will keep bringing back those aspects that you're struggling with. So you and I could start learning the same language at the same time and have a very different route and experience, which links to the next trend of adaptive learning. So again, generally powered by some kind of algorithmic underpinning. Adaptive learning as a concept would say that people can have learners can have different routes to achieve the same goal. Some learners, it might be identified, need extra support. Some learners can be fast-tracked, and that an adaptation can be made to personalize that learner's journey throughout. Gamification is, of course, another trend, and basically taking the concepts from the game world, trying to apply them to real life, and in particularly in education. Now, I do experience this every time I go to Costa Coffee, and every time I pay, I get the points and it's filling up, and it gets to a certain point and I get the free cup of coffee. This is an example of gamification. So using reward, using competition as a form of motivation and engagement. The trend of nano learning, micro learning, and micro credentials is something that's on the rise. So content chunks, I call them sometimes knowledge nuggets. If we can create digital content in these very small pieces, then it gives us lots of flexibility. These small pieces can combine to make micro learning, and achievement of micro learning can be attached to some kind of micro credentials. So it's not a full qualification. It's not like a university, graduate certificate, undergraduate, postgraduate qualification, but it's just it's an acknowledged official recognition of some learning that has been measured. So you can see here Informa are using digital badging to, reward acquisition of skills, knowledge, and maybe a wider certificate there. So I've got my own model in relation to this, and it talks about, development. It's a professional development model that is modular and stackable, and basically that we offer nano learning. So small bite-sized knowledge nuggets that introduce topics or concepts or create awareness. And these are generally no longer than 3 to 5 minutes. And these can be, sent to and engaged with a much wider audience. Those nano learning components can then be part of a micro learning course. So, adding assessment and feedback to that to create a more robust learning experience. And then in turn, micro learning can be complemented with face-to-face sessions and workshops to achieve micro credentials. So can you imagine a situation where a micro credential is received, and then it could be used to either fast track you onto a bigger program, or in a professional setting, there's just a certain skill set that you need to acquire. So you, rather than go through a whole degree program, you would just go and get that micro credential. Informal learning networks are becoming more and more popular. Again, as we become so connected with each other, connected with access to information, people are moving away from the more traditional approaches to knowledge acquisition, knowledge and skills acquisition, and they're looking to other providers depending on what it is. And obviously this is where the social media apps really play a big role in this. But I see everything that I've spoke about, really, I see it as really sub-trends underneath two kind of bigger trends. And I think those bigger trends are, one, a move towards more outcomes-based education. So being very specific, focused and honed in on what is trying to be achieved in a learning experience, I think is a very big approach. And then in relation to this for educators, how are we designing and measuring outcomes-based approaches? But I see the overarching real trend is this of lifelong learning. Okay, so from the cradle to the grave, people are now in situations where I think, one, we realize that our mindsets are not fixed, we're flexible, we have a need to constantly adapt in society. People are changing roles, people are reskilling, and people want access to flexible education in a convenient and cost-effective way. So this is really driving a lot of change in the education sector. Now, for educators, I really think this is highlighting a need for more purposeful learning design approaches, in which, you know, ways of learning and teaching and how learners learn are considered. Appropriate utilization of technology to support the learning experience and to provide wider access to learners. And in this particular model, there is an emphasis on, you know, learning as a social experience, and especially around collaboration. Okay, so this was just a quick highlight of some technologically driven trends in education for us to start considering how this might impact our educator practice.